I don't like being behind a podium, but I like to walk when I'm talking. Anyway, welcome everyone. My name is Gary Anzalone. I'm the president of BDPros, the organization that is putting this on. I know we have a lot of guests. By show of hands, how many people have heard about this organization? BDPros is a not-for-profit 501c6, and our purpose is to create a community of people that do business development. We share best practices. We have monthly events, quarterly events that are fundraisers. We have a golf outing coming up next month on the 20th. And our mission is to have this community of people that help each other, share best practices, gain new insights, and work towards goals. I've seen too many people that do business development not have specific game plan. They don't have goals. Their goal is to go out to events and meet as many people as possible, hand out as many business cards, get as many back, and really don't have an actionable plan. So what we strive to do is create that plan and help them to create the individual plan for each of their organizations. And we do that through education content and through other events, including fundraising for other charities. So without taking too much time, that's what the organization is. I'm going to introduce our moderator, and then he's going to take over, introduce our esteemed panel, and we'll have time at the end for some Q&A. Afterwards, we'll go back and have some drinks and some finger food, and hope you will enjoy the night. If you want to learn more about the organization, you could see, except for the panelists who are honorary members, anyone that's wearing one of these flower pins will probably be able to tell you how to get to the website. It's ibdpros.org, and you can learn more if you want to get involved. We have 6 standing committees, communication programs, a charity committee, and et cetera. I won't go into all of that, but we are looking to build this, and we are developing a chapter in South Florida and in Boston, and we're interested in having conversations with other locations as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Chris Collins. Chris serves as Managing Director of Cultural Projects for MGAC, an international owner's representative and project management firm with over 350 employees, 10 offices in North America and UK. Chris has 35 years of professional experience leading the design, management, and delivery of complex building projects. His portfolio includes a mix of complicated museum and entertainment projects, historical preservation work, training as a carpenter building custom homes, and professional training and practice as a licensed architect. Chris particularly enjoys helping artists with public art projects, having worked directly for artists to contract, plan, and fabricate and install over 35 public art projects, including Hank Willis Thomas's The Embrace, opened last year inside the Boston Common. MGAC is currently managing many cultural projects across the U.S., including the Visitor Center Museum and program-wide work to implement the $550 million Alamo plan in San Antonio. So please give Chris a big hand, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Gary. Ladies and gentlemen and fellow colleagues, I want to first thank BDP and MoMA for hosting this event. It's so meaningful to have moments of shared learning in the museum service provider community. Today we convene to delve into the intricate landscape of the museum design and construction industry, a realm where challenges and opportunities intertwine with the remarkable complexity of museum work. At the heart of our discourse lies a fundamental truth: the path to success in our industry is paved by careful planning, thoughtful leadership, and quality service providers. Yet achieving excellence isn't solely about technical prowess or cutting-edge innovations. It's equally about fostering robust relationships with people. We always say it's all about the people you work with, in delivering successful projects and representing interests of our clients. In an era defined by connectivity and collaboration, the significance of following the dynamics of service provider in the marketplace, cultivating meaningful partnerships cannot be overstated. Whether it's forging alliances with our clients, our subcontractors, or industry stakeholders, the art of building relationships is as vital as the structures we construct. Today, we'll consider how to best navigate through the challenges that confront us, armed with the understanding that the bonds we forge are the bedrock upon which our industry thrives. I'll take a moment to introduce our panelists who hold key positions at major cultural institutions here in Manhattan, thought leaders who are positioned to share some insights into how they manage competing priorities, procure services, develop business relationships with service providers, and with the intent to perform work around irreplaceable collections and landmark buildings in the city. So I'll start with Richard Stomber on our right here, Director of Building Operations here at MoMA. Over the last 30 years, Richard has worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Trinity Hospital, Stevens Institute of Technology, the Newark Museum, William Patterson University, and since 2017 as the Director of Building Operations at the MoMA. In senior facility management roles, he's had direct oversight of building engineering, building maintenance, capital planning, and project management. Richard has a BS degree in electrical engineering from Rutgers University, and MBA from Fairleigh Dickinson, and is the licensed mechanical engineer. Vice President of Capital Projects at the Met. He's responsible for the institution's ambitious $2 billion capital projects program, which encompasses the planning, architecture, and construction of the museum's permanent galleries and wings, workspaces, infrastructure, and public realm that span over 2 million square feet and 22 buildings. His work, which straddles both curatorial engagement with architecture and the institution's operations, was recently profiled by the New York Times. Jay also is a contributor to the forthcoming Met publication, Suspended Moment, The Architecture of Frida Escobedo, distributed by Yale University Press. Jay's career is dedicated to wielding architecture and the built environment as both transformative works of art and catalysts for cultural and socioeconomic progress. Jay was Senior Vice President and Head of Design and Construction at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, overseeing the development of cultural, institutional, industrial, commercial, and maritime assets across 5 boroughs. Before serving New York City, Jay was Associate Principal at Diller, Scofidio, and Renfro. He also received a master's degree from Harvard and a Bachelor of Arts degree in Architecture from University of California at Berkeley. He served on the Board of College Environmental Design, UC Berkeley, and is currently on the board of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. Robert Williams, we have the Senior Director of Construction at American Museum of Natural History. Robert is a wayward theatrical lighting designer whose passions for inspiring audiences evolved into managing the development and execution of over $900 million and a million square feet in world-class projects for cultural, educational, and corporate brands. During his 30-plus year career, he has served in diverse leadership roles, including theatrical designer, owner's representative, museum director, author, and media producer. His .org adventures have taken him from the stage of the Metropolitan Opera to the fairways of the U.S. Open Championship and now the halls of the American Museum of Natural History. And lastly, we have Joe Shatoff, Deputy Director of Chief and COO at the Frick Collection. Joe joined the Frick in 2016 in order to lead the institution's ambitious expansion and renovation effort. The project is expected to open to the public in late 2024. Joe's focus is on building specialized teams. Oh, that's this year. Yeah. Specialized teams and organizations to accomplish great projects together. Schedules are supposed to be aspirational, right? Joe has the unique distinction of having renovated the iconic Brewer building for the Met's tenure as Met Brewer, including oversight of the historic restoration and infrastructure upgrades, and then reconceiving the building to become the Frick Madison, a temporary home for the collection during construction at the mansion. Prior to joining the Frick, Joe was at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where, in addition to managing the launch of the Met Brewer, he was responsible for managing the museum's master planning process and leading the development of his 20-year infrastructure modernization plan. In addition to overseeing the expansion and renovation, Joe is responsible for the Frick's facilities, engineering, and security departments. Now I'm going to throw this first question to Robert. Given the need to protect the irreplaceable artifacts and objects in your collection, let alone the real estate and cultural heritage buildings. Can you explain your procurement process to become a vendor or a supplier at the institution and how risk mitigation impacts this process?
Can you repeat the question? No, just
Yes.
kidding. It's not going to be a surprise to all of you that in order to work in a world-class museum or cultural institution, I think the secret sauce for myself, and you'll hear from my colleagues, begins with the word trust, accountability, respect, an understanding of our mission, being on board with our mission, being accountable, having a very high level of integrity, being able to be transparent. We're not building commercial real estate. We're not in the game of, gamifying what we do in terms of, nickel and diming trades or contractors or the designers and consultants that we work with. The decisions that we make are based on value and the quality of the work. What we're building for generations for the most part, I would say. And we're in the inspiration business. So we need people along as partners who are willing to have that same mindset. So when we talk about procurement of, services to work on the facility, whether it's a infrastructure project or a new building out of the ground or an experiential project for exhibitry or media, anything across the spectrum of the built environment, the first thing we're looking for is, a partnership and someone that we can trust. So easy to say for those who work with us already that, oh yes, well, we trust them because we've worked with them for many years, right? So that's, and so reputation obviously is the second piece. If we're not working with someone we have worked before, then the next thing that really look at is, reputation. What did the people that you have worked for say about you? And then obviously your experience. Museums are unique places. They have unique challenges. And we answer to a lot of different masters related to the collections care, the conservation piece, the visitor amenities, visitor services piece. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And when you're dealing with institutions like the ones that are up here where you have millions of people coming through your facility, not only do you have to deliver a first-class experience, but you also have to be able to maintain that first-class experience. And that's probably the greatest challenge that we face. So finding partners who are willing partners and put some skin in the game, I would say, is a key aspect of, who we look to work with or who we're willing to work with.
That's good. Anyone else care to weigh in on this? I think this is probably, we started off with the hardest question because it's so complex and your organizations are so big. It's kind of a broad question.
I think one of the issues just that Robert kind of touched on is just being, your mission is to welcome visitors, and that requires a lot of times working off hours, you have to be quiet. There's going to be a performance in 10 minutes and the person's got to, they have to stop. But there's just the challenges of being open and doing work in an occupied facility so that it doesn't disturb others is a major challenge for a lot of our vendors.
How does the public-facing mission imperatives of your institution affect the selection of outside vendors, consultants, and contractors?
Well, first of all, I want to welcome everybody to MoMA, and it's a great place. So I come to work here every day, and I love it. And one of the reasons why I love working here is because of MoMA's values. And those forward-facing values are very important. I think we try to wear them on our sleeve. You can read our mission statement online or our value statement, and it'll say a lot of things that sound like very much related to an art museum. But at the ground level, our biggest priorities right now, and which are reflective of our forward-facing values, are really in the areas of diversity, equity, tolerance, inclusion, accessibility, and sustainability. Those are really where our assets and our work is going right now. MoMA's procurement model is we are a little bit different than most places. We are It's when we're hiring building professionals or design professionals, we're decentralized. So building operations procures those vendors on its own, and we may share vendors among others, but we make our own selection process. And our selection processes aren't formalized either, so it's hard to, there's always a DE/AI component. Those clauses are in our contracts, but we're not a public, we don't receive any public funding, so there's no like small business association set-asides or cutouts for MBE participation. That doesn't mean that when we hire a contractor for a big project, we don't put those in their requirements. But accountability for that is a little different. It's an arm's length relationship. So it's, I'd like to think we can do a better job, in getting all these values. But I would just say sustainability is a big thing. We look at vendors now, whether they're sustainable. We do look at their profiles online. We do look at the team that they're assigning to us, whether they're reflective of our own makeup here at MoMA. But we're very committed to these processes, and it's only becoming more highlighted as time goes on, as we try to improve in this area, and just as probably many of you are as well. It's a challenge too for us in many ways because we are a union. We only have union contractors here, so that tends to favor the more established companies, the larger companies that have experience in museums. So as Robert mentioned, familiarity a lot of times and museum experience is a big component in what might give you an edge in a museum and getting selected. So it's hard to you don't want to overstate those experiences, but and as Robert mentioned, another way to do this would be to just look at references and what people are doing, what they've done elsewhere before they applied to your institution for work.
Okay, good. And Jay, related to this, I think you have a massive capital project coming along here, and I think we talked about previously in our discussion the DEIA and sustainability initiatives. Yeah, how are those woven into your procurement and your capital projects planning? How does your institutional responsibility work with living your values?
Chris only asks difficult questions, apparently. So first of all, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for the introduction. It's wonderful to share this platform with all of you here, my colleagues, and to actually be here with you. It's an immense privilege for any number of reasons. One of which is I began my career in business development, and I have deep, profound empathy for what it is you all do. One of the scariest things I ever had to do and learned how to do in my first job was pick up the phone, and I had to call CEOs to get meetings, and they would constantly hang up on me. Of course they would. I mean, how did you even get to me would be the question. So I have some understanding of what it means to do what you all do, and how at times it is profoundly respected and other times not. My goal here is to provide you all with the vocabulary to understand the things that we, as a cultural institution, are interested in, so that you can lean into it and be relevant to us. So that's how I'm going to answer your question. There are two issues right now that I think most cultural institutions are wrestling with, and in fact, most institutions, generally speaking. And that has to do with the fact that the stakes are so high for us as a species. The climate crisis and socioeconomic inequity. The former is about the fact that if we don't reduce our carbon footprint by 50% by 2030, we are on a precipice, of course, right? And so what is the world that we are leaving for our children? The second issue has to do with the tribalism that has taken place globally. And there is one belief that a functional democracy is based on a robust middle class. And a robust middle class is one dedicated to what? Making things. Making things. And over the course of the last 5 decades, we have gutted our middle class, we have offshored jobs, and we have devalued our trades and our craftspeople. This is where we start to get into the answer to your question and what it is that you all do. So what is the role of an institution like a museum? You should know that the two things that museums are charged to do, traditionally, is a care for a collection, objects, The things that we make, they are the repository of our collective memories. That's what museums are, and the stories that we tell, education. Those are the two primary mission components of a museum, and that's what you should acknowledge. Then what's changed is that that's not enough anymore, given those two issues that I just outlined for us, right? How does a museum participate in those two issues? And that's where all of you need to figure out how to enter into the conversation. How do you engage those two matters? Because that's about how do you help a museum be relevant and useful. So let's focus on the DEIA piece for a second. I'm going to broaden it even further and talk about it in the context for what should be our reverence for people who make things. I'm going to put aside all the other categories for a moment. And let's talk about the fact that there is still this practice of risk mitigation, and we're going to look at, I'm going to get my tile from Italy, and I'm going to work with this contractor or that trade because they've got a track record. I'm going to get very personal for a second. My wife runs an MWB architecture practice, and I watch her struggle every day. And what the opportunity is to break cycles of inequity. That's the role of an institution. That's the role of a museum. That's the role of mission-oriented institutions. And so if you are not privileging and looking for our local craftspeople in the 5 boroughs, for example, finding out what it is that you all do. It's not about just race. It's actually about economics as well. You as an institution are not participating in breaking cycles of inequity. And you are not changing the conversation around reverence for the people who make things. Because what is a museum but a repository for the things that we make? We are all building and caring for those things at an immense scale, at the scale of a building. So the Met is taking a curatorial perspective on these issues. We've thrown out, I suppose, metrics, if only because they don't do enough. 30%, 40% MDBE is the minimum that we strive for every project, actually. If we can, we're going to pump every single dollar into the local 5 boroughs because it's about curating the spend. That's the opportunity for institutions. And therefore, the things that we make become markers of those values and those issues that we're facing. So those are the ways in which that we are trying to deal with it. The sustainability stuff you all know, I'm sort of glossing over it, but it's the envelope and it's the infrastructure, right? I mean, that's how you cut the carbon footprint down. But the first issue that I mentioned, DIA, also matters in that conversation. I don't know.
That's a great answer. It's probably the most important thing people in the business can really be doing right now is to try and really thoughtfully work through that and also get through the hurdles of, okay, if it's government financed, then you have to have a bond, large jobs, job sharing, partnering. That's something I think on many scale we try and work on that consistently, and I see that as an obligation. So thank you, Jay. Joe, I'm going to throw this one to you. What are your highest priorities in the selection process, and what do you value most in the value proposition offered by outside companies?
Well, I mean, I would say the way that I approach things, and I think the way that most people approach things through their own personal lens. So my own personal lens is largely about building teams, putting people together, bringing those things along. So I think sort of highest priority for me when I'm evaluating who I'm going to work with is not just who they are as a firm. That's sort of an entry point, right? Like if we're talking to you, we know who you are, we know what you're capable of, we know what you've done. From that point, it's who are we going to work with, I think is probably the primary thing. So I always look for, who is going to be that point person, because if you're the principal of the firm, I want to have access to you. I want my team to have access to you, but I know that you're not really going to do most of the work. You're going to assign that to a project manager or coordinator, depending on how you're structured. So that's probably highest priority for me. Who is that person? Is that a person that, that I feel comfortable? Is that a person that I think if I'm not going to be interfacing with them and, one of my colleagues is going to be interfacing with them, is that chemistry going to work? Is there going to be, are they going to be working at cross purposes? Are they going to be competing? Are they going to be, will they find sort of opportunities to grow and learn from each other? I think when you're working on these projects, they're complicated, they're stressful. There's got to be a person that is willing to try new things, to be honest, to be an open book. So that's probably the biggest thing for us. We don't, I think you're going to hear it over and over again here. We're not really buying on price. And each institution, I mean, the way that the Frick in particular is going to approach, a partner is quite different from how natural history would, or would likely from the Met. I would say that, the institution, the scale of it is quite different from a MoMA or a natural history or a Met, and the amount of work that we do. The interesting thing about the Frick is that it's a very, it's not that small an institution, but it never really did a big project. Now we're doing a big project. So even though it's a very mature institution, there's a lot of growing pains with that. So I think it's looking for vendors who, we can learn from, who our internal folks can learn from, and develop those relationships.
Basically, people talk about how museums are so much more complicated. From your perspective, you're protecting these things that are irreplaceable. The importance of that really weighs heavily on your minds of who you're going to use and if you're going to let new people in the door. So if you get, how long does it really take to become a vendor in the system and in the globe of your organizations here? Well,
I'll just be, quite honest about it. Of course, I mean, the Frick doesn't really have a system. It's a smaller institution. We're not publicly funded. We get some public funding. So it's really a much more organic kind of a process that we have. And so I think, if you're approaching an organization like that, it's sort of understanding that it is about the value and about the personal relationship. We don't have a whole bunch of hoops to jump through in terms of, pre-qualifying vendors and all of that. I think the other thing I'll just say to that question is that, I'm talking about it with a colleague earlier here, that so much of our spend is going through, on a project in particular, a construction manager. And there's always a kind of a fine line between how much, as an owner, we want to bring people to the table and how much we want to influence that versus let our construction manager bring those folks and make that decision. So that's all, I think in terms of a large project spend, just sort of a back and forth that we have.
Yeah.
If I can just connect the dots between something Jay said and what Joe said, there's an opportunity to sort of thread the needle when we do these highly specialized projects that require a lot of attention to detail and a lot of care, and that is bigger is not better. The people who build and are capable of building airports at that scale don't automatically work at the scale of a 2.2 million square foot, 25 building campus for the Museum of Natural History. The attention to detail is the key. And so a lot of the vendors that we use are very boutique and very small. And I think that just opens the door to, Jay, what you were saying in terms of finding ways to bring people into the mix who have not traditionally been there.
So it's not good enough that we bring you all in. We can't let you fail. And what that means is that we actually have to have a far more intimate relationship with you. And I don't mean just at meetings and principal involvement either, which is important. I mean, we have a practice of having our collaborators open their books to us. Not because I want to see whether or not they can do the work, but because then we can help support them with salaries, with the people that they need to hire, with the people they need to retain, so that we can understand the skill set, so we can train their folks. It's a different kind of infrastructure and armature that has to be in place if you're really committed to working with folks who haven't done this kind of work before. That's how you manage risk. It's actually not on you. It's not on you. It's on the institutions to do that.
If only all my museum clients were like these guys. That's very well said. And we always think about how...
That's one of the problems, right?
Yeah.
You got 4 guys up here. So that in and of itself is a statement about...
Yeah. I'm curious, what do you think cultural institutions should be doing differently when they're preparing for either capital projects or renovations? and how they're engaging with the community, or do we feel like we covered that already?
We didn't talk about like models.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we gravitate towards at the Museum of Natural History more and more is design build. And the reason that we gravitate towards that model, especially on the infrastructure side, is we don't like to get to the end of a project and have the finger pointing between the design and engineering team and the construction team. That's like a complete waste of my time, and my team's time and the institution's time, to have people fighting about, what was the design intent, and I thought it was going to be this, but we built it this way, and remember the shop drawing. So accountability in terms of like a model and pairing people up and finding partners that can develop things that actually work and are thought through. And all too often we see in the, is anybody in this room familiar with the software Procore? Yeah. So we just recently built the Gilder Center on Columbus Avenue, and I watched thousands and thousands of Procore messages stream across the airwaves for 5 years, as did some of my colleagues and friends up there from Zubacken. And, it was supposed to make the project better. Revit was supposed to make the project better. Nonsense. Like the people is what would make the project better. And in this sense of like teamwork and being, accountable to like making it actually work for the institution. So I think that's a major piece of the secret sauce is fixing this idea of us versus them, right? That's a very 20th century designer versus construction manager. And we're going to argue about how you drew it and how it's bought. And then this terrible word that I saw in too many Procore exchanges, that's means and methods, which most of the time means like, well, the designer didn't fully design it for the most part. That's probably one of the biggest pet peeves of like, well, we'll let the trade, figure it out. And so I'd rather do that in design and engineering phase, is let the trade and bring those people in early if they're willing to participate in an early phase, and make sure that when we go into construction, we've already answered all those little tricky questions about how the waterproofing works in the bathroom, not when we're standing there and we have to get the bathroom open and no one can agree upon how the waterproofing and the tile works. So that's a...
Yeah. And actively facilitating coordination between your design and construction partners. Like no matter whatever your procurement methodology is, if people are not willing to work together and coordinate things in a meaningful way and show their dedication to the project, I think that's a big problem. Have you had success with design build in other projects? So that's not a standard thing in the museum industry.
No, I mean, coming from a sort of a theatrical background, it's commonplace in the theater business as to how we build experiential environments for shows. So that's where I sort of come at it from, that you need the technical expertise as a part of the design process. Once the concept comes into formation, you really want all that expertise to sort of be baked in as you get into actually, being on site and actually building something.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I was going to just mention that, design build is a probably a more effective way to expedite something, because there's a lot of pressure, even in museums where there isn't necessarily a competitive advantage of finishing your renovation earlier. Maybe the Frick's a different situation, but there's not a competitive, but we're always in a rush to build things. We want to demonstrate. We have people at the top of their fields here, and but planning is really a lot of times not given the full consideration that it does. Now, that doesn't mean you have to wait for 100% documents to be done before you start bidding or before you even start building. But I think just emphasizing the need for proper planning and just understanding how your decision-making process works at the institution that you're in. Is it collaborative? Is it really collaborative? Is it where it's like, and what's the timelines for decisions? Are people going to be there to make the decisions that you're going to need to make in a timely fashion? I'm sure you've struggled with this in your cases as well. Or your decision-making process might be autocratic. It depends on your institution, but, the larger ones, I think we're probably a little bit better adapted expediting things, but I think the smaller museums might be challenged by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing a design build right now with our facade repairs and cleaning in advance of completing the project. It's one of those scope items that we didn't fold in with the rest of the project. And we are, it is time challenged. And once we understood the arc of the project, we knew we had to do this work. And so that was a case where, we took two very trusted partners, longtime vendors of the Frick, and, paired them together and decided that this was how we were going to do it. So, maybe we may be paying a cost premium for that. We're evaluating the best we can, but we sort of are weigh that out and feel like it makes sense. And we don't, it gives us a security that we're going to get the job done and that there's a commitment to doing that. So, I mean, that's a similar theme in a really specific example. And other parts of the project, I don't think it would make sense, obviously, in the larger sort of architectural part of the project.
Okay. Well, let's continue talking about the money a little bit. Maybe I'll throw this to you, Jay, since you're so good at answering hard questions. So let's talk about how you prioritize and balance the costs needs between capital programs, deferred maintenance, and infrastructure improvements. How do these needs compete internally with public programming and curatorial programs?
Okay. How do I answer that one simply? We try to no longer make a distinction between any of those. For example, I always make the argument you cannot have a gallery without a roof, and you cannot have a gallery without conditioning it. And there was a practice in the past where the galleries were bifurcated from infrastructure improvements, and therefore came from two different funding sources. And what that led to is that you as an institution were not doing the right thing. It was lopsided. You would focus on the galleries because the galleries could be named and they can raise money. The infrastructure cannot, traditionally. So there's two things that we did. One is we altered the very framework and approach to aesthetics and infrastructure. So if you take, for example, the work of the Beschers that spent their lives photographing industrial landscapes, you begin to understand the beauty of infrastructure, actually. It's just a mindset to not look at it the same way. And when we began to change people's understanding of beauty, we began to expand their vocabulary and understand that infrastructure was not separate and apart from the architecture that was happening in the galleries. Two, we no longer allowed the infrastructure scope to be pulled apart from the galleries. It would all be lumped together and it would produce a bottom line budget, and it was what it was. And when folks wanted to pull it apart, we wouldn't let them. You can't pull it apart. So that was the other thing that we did. And so going back to my initial point too, if you make the case for the two priority issues, one of which being solving the climate crisis, you're not going to ignore infrastructure. You're going to do it, and you're going to find a way to couple it with the galleries. So I talk about this moment that happens in museums. I call it the coalescence of obsolescence, and it happens every 40 years or so for galleries, for museums. There's a moment in which the classification systems for a collection changes. It's out of date. Education changes. Our understanding of how to show the objects changes. If you're lucky, that coincides with your infrastructure also becoming obsolescent. And as you know, infrastructure lasts for about, 40 years. And so those are the really great moments where you combine projects, and that's what the capital plan does. It scans and audits our spaces, and it looks at that moment of collision between the display of a collection and aging infrastructure. And that's when we raise the capital to do the work, but we combine it all as a single capital project. Does that begin to sort of answer the question? There are various different funding sources that I can get into. There's city funding, there's a bond, there's donor funds, et cetera, and so forth. But the key to it all is to not pull the infrastructure apart from public realm and public space, and then look at those projects as an individual project, and then look at the different funding sources that can be rolled into it. And that's how we start to attack the problem.
And that's really related to, thank you. That's really related to the governance of projects too, and how decisions are going to be made in the planning process. I always find this working in the project fields that large institutions have a hard time speaking with a single voice. You have the curatorial department, you've got your facilities folks, security. These people all have day jobs, and by the way, you're building a new building or renovating. It's one of the hardest things, and we see institutions or smaller organizations, if it's a startup museum, struggle with these kinds of things, and then you're relying on consultants to help you make those decisions. Speaking from experience of having run projects, how, and you kind of hit on this a little bit, Jay, but others can jump in. How do you help your institutions speak with a single voice when it comes to major issues like this?
I'm sure everybody here has a response to that. I'll be super quick and defer to my colleagues. So I'll give you, for example, the Tang Wing, the new modern contemporary wing that the museum is building. I have 31 stakeholders on that project. The purpose of the capital projects team is to act as the client group for the museum, and in doing so it manifests the aligned voice of the institution. Our primary job is not to build things on budget, on schedule. It is. Our primary job is not to build beautiful things, of course, that all goes without being said. All of that is enabled by actually building consensus amongst all of those folks. And this is where I might start to sort of step into controversial area. Our style at the Met is not to outsource that consensus building and alignment to anybody else. It's within the Met. So if you wanted to take the curtain back a little bit, understand how the Met is organized, the capital projects team has about 25 folks on it. They're all project managers, essentially, and they act as the owner. They're organized in 3 portfolio groups, each one led by a senior project leader, and each one has about half a dozen folks underneath them. They are essentially the owner's reps, but they are the owners of the institution, and they are embedded. They are there every day working with the curators on objects conservation and scientific research and security, et cetera, and so forth, because all the conversations happen on the side. All the consensus building happens in the lunchroom and in corridors. So the way in which the Met is set up to manage that risk and to enable complexity for the work of the designers that are putting forward is to actually embed that in-house. And that's how we build consensus.
Can I ask a question about that, Jay? Are those folks empowered to bring in, new relationships, new partners, and how does that work, within the organization?
It's a great question. So let's say, do you mean contractors, construction managers, architects, engineers, or
maybe I was thinking maybe owner direct consultants, maybe the range.
Owner direct consultants.
Various consultants that you might be working with on a particular project, who might be a resource on a project.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, so they're empowered to. So it was a shift, a paradigm shift within the institution, where when I first arrived, there was no clear, precise client group actually, and so curators were clients, conservation was clients. Everybody was giving our architects and engineers and our contractors direction. And they did not know who to listen to. And their job, therefore, is spent most of the time building consensus within the Met. What happens is we change that model. And so no longer is their job to build consensus. It's going to be the job of the capital projects team. And so, therefore, they're also empowered to make decisions on behalf of the institution. Because when they make a decision on behalf of the institution, whether or not it's to procure or hire or identify and work with a consultant or a trade or a designer, it's because it represents consensus. I don't know if that's what you're getting at.
No. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it because I do think it's one of the. It's interesting to me because my colleagues who are building the job, and it's not my job to build the job, right? That's what they're doing. But I find a lot of times they're bringing those decisions to me, right? And I may or may not have the time or the expertise or the wherewithal to fully evaluate that. But so those are a lot of times, I'm bringing it up because I think those are a lot of times, those are the people that you're talking to. Those are the people that you're pitching. But just to understand what's going on in the organization, and a lot of the times those are, in my case, coming to me, and I've got to make a final decision. And really what I'm looking for in that process is, have they done their due diligence? Do they have a good reason why they're suggesting that we work with A or B, or I'm walking them through a process of, how they might evaluate, the candidates that they've got in front of them. So just curious of how that worked at the Met. I think at the Frick, it's because it's a one-time kind of a project. It's sort of it's more organic, and that's how it's grown. Yeah.
That's very good. Great conversation. All right, I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we can open up to the audience. How about that? Now, I'm always fascinated being in the project world, right? And most people in this room are in the project world, where you show up to something for a while, you work on it, and it's done, and you go away, and clients are off driving the car, right? And I think it's one of the hardest things that a team can do is plan for the day when you hand over those keys, and you have that relationship that's still there. You've got a warranty. I'm curious if each of you could just step into your rearview mirror for a second for the benefit of the crowd and the design and construction nerds in the room. Tell us some things that you have learned through the process that could be avoided in the future. Share some wisdom.
Well, MoMA finished a major expansion project in 2019. We reopened in 2019, and we had a star architect, DSR, wonderful firm to work with. Gensler was basically the clerk of the works architect, and it was probably somewhat fast tracked. And I did see Peter. He's from Turner. I believe he's here, and he was the account executive for that project. So if you have any questions about how to get business at MoMA, maybe you can ask him. And but he was excellent, and his team was excellent. But that doesn't mean that there weren't challenges. Certainly challenges in the build. Certainly challenges with specialized systems, with vendors that may not be able to perform the way you expected them to, and subcontractors. The foreign materials, sole source materials, all these things, the things that Jhaelen mentioned before, Buy American was not necessarily in the contract documents, but it was, but it eventually did get turned over to us. And when it got turned over, unfortunately, we were basically doing work until like the last day. We were working on things, and when we reopened, we just had tremendous amounts of people. So it was very hard to reopen, and then people are using it, and then things are, I don't want to say breaking, but things aren't going quite the way that you thought that they were. So we were very thankful to have, we use Nuforma, we use Procore now, but that system and all that account documentation is there. So when a specialized system breaks, you don't have to call Turner. You could just look through the documentation, and you have the contacts and the warranty and all that information's there. So that made it incredibly helpful. The specialized systems and the nature of the vendors, like teams coming from across the country to install, or around the world in some cases, to install things here. I think if we could have avoided those sole source, or I'll call it exotic relationships with materials, or specialized systems that don't have really a presence locally, that would probably save us a lot of time and a lot of money in the long term. Having local presence that can support your equipment without having to travel or international airfare or stay in a hotel, it's gonna make things a lot easier for your users in the end.
That was a good broad statement without offending anybody, so that was good. Is anybody a fan of glass elevators that are custom?
We have one in our shop, but only, yes, this is one of two in the country, I think. But it's a specially designed elevator, and it's, when you only have one elevator like that, it's just, the components were individually manufactured for that one particular elevator in many cases, and just access and serviceability are just another challenge altogether. But thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, and I'm not picking on you. I've seen that movie before.
And I'm sure Turner I'm sure people argued against it or questioned it at the time, but it was, it just was going to happen.
I think you got to manage people's expectations too. So, the museum just completed the Gilder Center a year ago. I did the first budget for it when I worked for Zubakin in 2008, and it took a very long time for it to get baked before it finally got built. And the museum went down the road, unsurprisingly, of hiring Jeannie Gang, a star architect, to produce something that would be an icon to New York. That was a very intentional choice. right? We weren't building a Holiday Inn on 95. We knew what we were getting into. The institution knew what it was getting into, and it said, we're gonna do something really unique and bespoke. And the administration had to be reminded throughout the entire process. Even I came into the process when the building was about to be constructed to work on the fit out of the building, but they had to be reminded before I got there and then after I got there about what that meant in terms of the decisions to build a very bespoke building. And for those of you who have seen the Gilder Center, we built a giant sculpture and we put a museum inside of it. And that meant that there were concessions to museum operations and the conveniences that we would normally love to have if we were working in a box. And so that's sort of just one thing in terms of managing expectations about if you're going to go down that road of building something like that, and working with all the stakeholders that Jay is talking about, and bringing them into that process and reminding them of what's achievable given some of those higher level concept decisions. Looking back on the Gilder Center, one of the last things we did as we approached the opening was we built a new budget called the Gilder Day 2 budget, because we knew that the building to become fully operational needed to be modified in order to meet our requirements. And I think that was born of, it's very difficult with time pressure and money pressure and all the things that go into a major project to make the design and consultant teams and the construction teams keep their operational hats on. And that would be like if there's like a dream or a fairy godmother to building these projects, trying to get all the way down to the trades level. And I think we did have as many successes as we had failures when we built the building, of having people understand, someone's got to pull that strainer, someone has to change that filter, someone's got to replace that light bulb 20 years from now. And, if you can get the team on board with that type of thinking as they're building it, it's as easy as not, in many cases, to make the building more operator friendly. And I think when you're building something that we intend to last 150 years, and we have buildings that are that old, that mindset and trying to bake that into the process, I think, is something that, that we aspire to. We're not only successful, but it's something that, we aspire to have our teams understand that.
Oh, Joe?
Well, I'm right in the middle of it, so it's hard sometimes to get a perspective about, what lessons learned. But one that I've been thinking about lately is, you need more people. That I think there's very much a pressure, I think, in most business environments to to operate efficiently and to be very careful about adding headcount and payroll and all of that stuff. But I think with these projects and working with so many complex trades and consultants and so forth, it takes a lot of it just takes a lot of mind share to do it. So I think sort of setting that expectation, and that's what I was thinking about also, is expectation, setting that expectation with with leadership, that you cannot build something of scale and quality without real talent and horsepower both on your side.
Yeah, and it becomes a second job for the 31 people that you're talking about, Jay.
Yeah.
It's it's a second job for them. And so strategically, are you going to support them by bringing in staff to help do their day job? How do you create space for them to be involved in the process? Because that's what's going to make the project successful.
Robert, I mentioned, I'll say it to other clients in the future, what you just said about planning for a day 2. And we find that sometimes when you're going along, you're getting through a project and people want to work together, but you get to the point of a project where you can see it in people's eyes. They're like, stop asking us to take care of those little things. Have a day 2 plan or develop a SWAT team. And that's good advice. I think that's good. Now, one of you is going to have to give up your microphone and would like to open it up for a question. Oh, we have one. Okay, great. How about right here? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for a phenomenal panel. I almost didn't come, so I'm so glad I came. First, I want to thank for the shout out for the MWBs. I'm one of those, and I really appreciate what you said. I can't stress enough what you also mentioned, that the success of a collaboration is when I am opening my books to you and you're helping me figure it out. I've been extremely successful adding value, but only when I have a partnership like this kind. My question is about the design build process, because I believe in it very wholeheartedly. And I also see that it works very well. I'm a customer experience designer, which means my job is kind of that middle person to collaborate across all of these disciplines. What I'm faced with often, though, is that it's extra money. It's money because I want more meetings. I want more people from each trade at these meetings. And I'm constantly hearing pushback of like, why should we come? Or why should we have so many meetings? Or why do you need a day event and design session? Why can't we just do a Zoom? So my question is, where and how do you see this from a money perspective and budgeting? Because it's been pretty challenging to actually convince the community that that's the path forward and put it in the budget when we have the RFPs. Even tonight, I have to justify my existence. And it should be something that comes from the owners, is my point. I don't see it coming through. It seems like the engineers and architects just have to add it as some sort of expense. And I don't know if that's a controversial question or no. I'm just looking for my reality here. So that's what I wanted to ask you guys. Thank you.
It doesn't cost any more money. It changes your cash flow as to where you spend the money in the time scale. But my experience, if you're going to build something nice, which is we're all in the business up here of building things that are nice, good, fast, cheap, pick any two, right? You're going to pay the same thing. You're not going to get away with anything in a project. So the pain factor and the amount of Advil, I think, is alleviated in the design build process, because as much of the questions that you can answer up front and figure out in advance, and projects do change and things do, alter, but you're much better off going into a project, right, in the construction process, having a very good battle plan and knowing exactly what you're going to build, than when you discover something in the middle of the construction process and you want to change it, or you have to alter it for something that was knowable. So you have design and engineering drawings put together, you go out the street and you bid it and you buy it. And I would say one of the things that the industry faces is that the quality of design and engineering documents, for the most part, are not getting better. They are getting average. Because some of the bigger firms and whatever, their model is to have the lowest person on the totem pole create the drawings and we'll figure it out in design. That's a common problem. See it all the time. And we'll figure it out in construction administration and we'll put the stuff on the trades and whatever and let them figure it out. Happens all the time, in my experience. So I don't think it costs any more money. I think it's an education cost-benefit analysis thing. It doesn't work for everything. I'm not going to say that as well. It doesn't work for everything, but it is. I think it's an education piece for the owners. But you got to show them in the dollars and cents. But you're never going to get away with, a process where you figure something out. You don't figure something out in design. The owner's going to pay for it at the end. So to me, it's just a cash flow. It's just a cash flow piece.
I have a sort of black cape question for MoMA. During or after the 2004 expansion, Taniguchi was the architect, and I remember reading or seeing an interview with him, and he said to the client that, if you give me this amount of money, I'll design a fabulous project. But if you give me this amount of money, I'll make it disappear. And I was wondering what you think he meant by that.
Well, thank you so much for asking that question. I read a quote from him today about this building, because this building was redesigned in 2004. This theater's circa 2004. And he said, I don't, this is the only thing I can think of in response to your question, which is something else that he said to the effect that when you finish designing a museum, it should look empty without art. It should look unfinished without art. We didn't say empty. He said unfinished. So really, the art is your finishes in this. For a museum like MoMA, the art is really what provides the finishes in the space. And I think what I'm not an architectural historian, but Taniguchi's very rectilinear, and his spaces are layered, and he shows you the thickness of walls, and he pokes holes through walls and through spaces, and that's why we have this wonderful space, these spaces that he designed. But I think in the end, his comment is more. I'm going to guess it's more about you're there not to see the building, you're there to see the what's in the building, and the building itself shouldn't detract from that. And his design is somewhat minimalist, in a way. So I think it works very well in a modern. I mean, it works wonderful in a modern art museum environment. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Viola. I'm a senior construction manager, and hearing your pain points makes me feel better about myself. My question is more related towards integration of AI with all the advancements of AI and technology. I'm curious to know if your institution plans to explore the possibilities and potential challenges of integrating AI in design and construction.
So one of the things that we are currently in the process of doing is a campus master plan. The first phase of it is data collection about every asset across the entire spectrum of the building. And similar to what Jay, you were saying, it excludes nothing. And we've begun collecting all that data. And one of the fascinating things about it is, wow, we have a lot of data. Right, every air handler, every roof, every floor, every toilet, everything. And so we haven't figured it out yet, but we are in search of building a container for it so that we can derive analytics about the campus in a real-time way that helps us understand how to prioritize and make good choices about how we cyclically keep the asset up and where we have opportunities to make programmatic improvements.
Hi, my name is Bonnie, and I'm wondering if you have considered mass timber for any of your facilities in the near future, knowing that the laws here in New York have changed, and what are your thoughts about that and your design team? Are they working on anything in the future or around mass timber in your facilities, or have considered?
We aren't at MoMA, but
yeah, I mean, I think with certainly a museum like the Frick, it's so specific. The type of architecture we do is so specific. So, that wouldn't be in the cards for an institution like the Frick. I mean, I wonder, natural history and the Met that has sort of a different scale, if that's something that comes up.
Yeah, I mean, most of our buildings are made out of masonry, steel, historic structures, and we were sort of governed. We live in the land of LPC, but I wouldn't say necessarily opposed to using the product, but it would unlikely be a featured piece unless we're building a new building, which, Rich, I hope we're not building a new building anytime soon. Thanks.
I have another question.
Yes.
If we can just go back to the pains in the construction process and dealing with architects and interior design. You mentioned means and methods being a trigger word, which is something that I'm very familiar with as an interior designer. And in considering how we can improve ourselves and learn from this conversation, are there any other specific things that you would say that we could improve on, architects and designers specifically?
it's just about putting the time in to figure out how to build it all the way, right? I mean, I don't know how else to.
So becoming other experts,
Like,
not just in the design process, but
answer all the questions. And I think that goes to my comment about design build or bringing trades into the conversation in the process. There's what you want it to look like, and then there's, okay, well, it's got to be waterproof, it's got to be whatever, it's got to be. And so whether it's other consultants or bringing in the other expertise, like, answer all the questions that are inevitable that the trades are going to ask when we ask them to build it. Like, it's not fair to ask an electrician or a steel guy or whatever to, like, here it is, like, make this float in midair. Like, well, that's means and methods. Like, no, you got to actually, build it in your head. And if there are questions in building it in your head that you can't answer, then let's find the answers in the design and engineering process. And again, I think it's a net cost save to do that, even though it takes more time. If you were to interview some of the project architects that worked under Starchitects that I've worked on projects with, they feel tremendous pain in the CA, right, that they wouldn't otherwise have felt if they had taken the time to figure it out, which is not always possible on time constraints and all that kind of stuff. But whenever possible, think it through all the way. And then when that's not possible, bring a solution-focused mindset to the room when you're working with the trades. They are not your adversary. They are your partner. They are a part of the team. And that's something that will bring you great benefit if you can bring that attitude into those rooms.
I think architects and interior designers, landscape architects need to charge more money. And I think you need to bill more frequently, and I think you need to be more transparent about what it actually costs to do the work that you do. And I think that you don't value yourselves. You're nervous. You're always nervous about hitting us with that bill. And if we're really good clients, we should acknowledge the amount of work that goes into it, and you should just be transparent about it. Now, that's a little bit unfair to say to you because it depends on who's sitting across the table from you. I get it. And there's a lot of bad clients out there. So I think, but it's just a general recognition and lifting up and reverence for the work that you all do. It's really tremendous. And it's interesting to hear what you're saying, because if I think about when I was at Diller, and and I'm involved in my wife's practice, and I've been involved in the operations of multiple architecture firms, what I will say is happening is that the devaluation of that work is leading to a change in the way in which architects bill. And so there's a lot of front loading of those fees also. But it's also because there isn't the recognition for the amount of work that actually goes into it, because what the market tells you the value of your services is wrong, and that's what everybody's using to negotiate. And it's really tough because you don't have advocates who are defending the fees that you're putting forward for that best work, but they want the best work, but they don't want to pay for it. That's a problem.
On that note, I think we're going to wrap it up. Yeah, thank you. That's a great way to end this. A valuable evening. Thank you so much to our panelists and attendees tonight at PDP. Thanks for having us.
So before everyone leaves, I just want to say thank you to our sponsors, Skyline Builders Group and Champion Elevator. Without that support and without the support of a full board and committee chairs and people active in the organization, this doesn't happen. So again, let's give our moderator and panelists a big hand of applause.